You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to begin? Look no further. The team at Dodge Media Productions has 20 years of experience as podcast listeners and observing the industry and 8 years experience in podcast production. We can help you take your podcast from idea to fruition, and we'll make the process seamless and easy. We'll help you with everything from recording and editing to hitting the charts on Apple Podcasts. So what are you waiting for? Contact us today and let's get started. DodgeMediaProductions.com.
All right, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. This week we're going to talk about a cheery movie, Nuremberg. The cheery was a little bit sarcastic, although I guess it depends on your perspective about those events. Pretty deep film, pretty intense subject matter. I would categorize it completely as a drama. I don't believe there were any relief chuckles in there at all.
I don't think so.
Completely a drama. And if I'm being honest, this movie has Oscar bait all over it. This is exactly the kind of film that is perfect for Best Picture and Best Actor. It's that kind of film. I don't mean that as an insult to the film, but I expect there to be quite a bit of Oscar buzz about this film and the performances. I was surprised at how much I believed Russell Crowe's German. At the beginning of the film, he speaks German, and to my ear, he speaks it pretty well in his character as Hermann Goering, if I'm saying that right. Perhaps superfans from Matthias and Katie could phone in and let us know about both my pronunciation and Russell's.
Yeah, I was curious, when you said that, I was going to call out that we know a person that hails from Germany. I would be curious how they felt his accent was.
I know that in Inglourious Bastards, there was talk about someone, I think it was Fassbender's accent being muddled from different regions in Germany, which I didn't catch because I'm not a native speaker. So that was a case here where I don't know if Goering came from a particular part of Germany where you would know the accent, New York Jew versus a Southerner versus somebody from, Hawaii. In the U.S., they could all be speaking American, but it wouldn't ring true. I don't know, but it landed for me, and I was surprised because I still see Russell Crowe, I'll be honest, as more of an action figure-y kind of guy. And in this role, which is dramatic, which is, I think, a psychological role, a big part of the film that I think works well is this mental chess between Crowe's Goering and Rami Malek's doctor. Mm-hmm. And again, I wouldn't necessarily have gone first to Russell Crowe for a nuanced psychological thriller, but I do think in addition to his physical build and facial structure, I think he does well in this role. I was pleasantly surprised. I don't know Rami Malek's work that well. I haven't seen a ton of his films, but I thought in this role he seemed like he did a pretty good job. But it's hard when you're put on screen next to Michael Shannon, who I think is really at the top of his game in a lot of the recent films. His character maybe doesn't have quite as much screen time, but I feel like it was very well done. All of the acting was very good, but I don't know that I know enough about the story to comment on how historically accurate it was, but it made for a very good film. The basic plot of this film goes through an international tribunal trying the leaders of Nazi Germany for war crimes, which was an important point in history. And when you say that, you would normally think that's not a very exciting film, but I think there was excitement in this film because they set up this kind of mental chess match between Goering and everybody else, as well as within the U.S. Army. There were tensions. There was a reporter who was not particularly trustworthy. There are some different aspects of human nature that made this film, I thought, pretty engrossing for what is in essence a courtroom drama.
Mm-hmm. I like Rami Malek as an actor. I think super enjoyed him as Freddie Mercury. I couldn't get past, I don't think it's because of his diminutive size, but he just seemed too young to be a doctor of that level.
Okay.
Just, he looks, and I think, you know, like this is a good thing and a bad thing. He kind of reminds me of like a Michael J. Fox or a Ralph Macchio or, you know, Rob Lowe even. These people who don't age, and so then it's hard to buy because although I guess he was in the military, so maybe you could advance at the level he is without being like a tenured professor in your 40s. And who knows, Rami Malek could be like 41. Like, right. I don't know, but he looks 24. Like he very looks much does very young.
Look young.
And so it was hard for me to, I want to say buy, but believe that, but maybe he was like a wunderkind, to use the German, right?
Points.
Was he just so smart and he could read people? But what I thought was good, and I don't know if this was intentional, is he came on from almost when he was on the train and he was flirting with that woman. He came on very egotistical and arrogant, like very self-assured, if not arrogant, very self-assured. And so it was ironic because he was talking about how Goering was arrogant and, you know, you could use that against him. And I almost felt like at times Goering used the doctor's character, Carey, was it? What was his last name?
I want to say Gilbert.
Kelly,
perhaps.
Anyway, Rami's character, he would use his arrogance against him. So I thought that, I don't think that was an accident. Stuff like that I don't think is an accident in screenwriting. But I thought it was a good, you know, there have been different times like Frost Nixon or different movies like that where you've got two really important people kind of going up against one another.
Right.
And they each have characteristics, and it's usually like good versus evil, kind of, or good guy, bad guy. But they each have, I mean, you could probably say that about Die Hard, right? Like Hans Gruber and Bruce
John McClane.
Yeah. They probably have characteristics that were similar, right? Because that's what makes them probably good foes, because they're equally matched on certain things.
Right.
So I found that part of this very interesting, that kind of they each could use their strengths and they each could use their flaws to their own advantage or to the detriment of the other.
What makes it, to me, interesting that it works so well as a story is because even if you did not know the history of those trials, you were early on exposed to this prison is basically inescapable. They have a scene where they talk about the German construction of these cells, and they're concrete and there's really no way to escape. So we know that these Nazi leaders are not getting out. So in a certain sense, the conclusion is a foregone one. Yet there is this, how are they going to get there? And as you said, this battle of wits where they are similar to each other, and perhaps that does make for the best foes or rivals in a sense. Who is going to get one up on the other? And we see the Colin Hanks character, I think, serves to highlight that difference, that he does not have this battle of wits with anyone. He's very by the book, and we're just going to go through this process. Don't overthink it.
Well, and at times, but they almost become friendly, if not friends.
Yes, and I think that is supported by historical evidence that the doctor and Goering had this very interesting, and I don't mean this in a sexual way, intimacy that was abnormal for the others. And
well, and it's kind of, I believe, with what little psychology I took in college, people don't recommend. Like, that's a flaw in your job.
Professionalism has some distance.
Yeah.
There's a character played by John Slattery, who, again, I don't know if this is a historical character or an amalgamation, who has, I think, the anger that many people did toward the Nazis. He has zero give. It almost feels to me like he's being held back. He would just kill them all immediately and go on with his day. This guy seems like he really is quite angry. And I don't say that as a criticism. It was a very nasty war. And he probably lost people that he knew. And there are reasons for him to have that. One of the reasons that people might be angry at that time is obviously the concentration camps. And they had footage in there that I presume is historical footage that they included with proper attribution. I sincerely hope they didn't try to recreate any of that. We shouldn't have had it the first time, but to do it a second time seems very difficult for everyone involved. One of the things they did not cover in depth here, because it's not really part of this story, but is the fact that many people thought that at the time even the Holocaust wasn't as bad as it really was, because people hadn't seen it. The people who had seen that, there were occasional people who escaped those camps. They would bring stories back, and I think it was just so hard for humans to wrap their brain around that level of atrocity that a lot of people just didn't understand at a visceral level. So there is a scene where they're showing this footage and they show the people in the courtroom having reactions to the footage, which I think is realistic. And from me, who, as a person who obviously did not live through that era, it was historical for me. I know that I was intellectually aware of what had happened during the war, but it didn't have the same impact. I didn't really get a sense of it, and I'm sure I still don't compared to the people who lived through that. But seeing those photos, even before the film, when I had seen some of the stuff that had gone on, it really, again, is almost impossible to wrap your mind around. And that to me is the importance of this topic, even though the film doesn't go terribly deep into this. How can we as humans have gotten to that point? And part of the answer to that question that I think this film has is that the people at the top of the Nazi regime were this cult of personality. They were very charming. They were intelligent, but in an evil kind of way. And I think Russell Crowe's Goering has that sense of, he is kind of a genius at a certain level in a weird kind of way. And he's maybe using that genius on this doctor. And we see this other character who is the driver for Rami Malek's character. He's played by a fella, I think his name is Leo Woodall. I know him from a show called Prime Target, which had a promising start, but the writing was, I think, a little off. He did the best he could with what he was given. That's really the only thing I've seen him in. I thought he did a very good job about having this character who is under the radar in a sense and has a big reveal at the end of the film. We try not to worry about spoilers much, but go see the film and you'll understand. We see that personalization of this whole era and what we as a people were really trying to discuss in this trial.
Yeah, I think, well, to your point about the atrocities, I think, like you said, we're of an age that this was history that we were taught in school. And I think when you hear 7 million Jews were killed, that's really difficult. I mean, it's an astounding number. 7 million is a lot, but it's so sanitized. And even though you can intellectually, we've seen the films and different things, seeing those videos that they showed, and I too think that those were actual videos that probably have been not shown due to decency up until now, because you would hope that even if they were all mannequins or whatever, that just wouldn't be recreated. I would fear for the people who had to be in
poor art department in that case.
Yeah. So I'm sure that those are actual films. And I think when you see it in that context, and I'm not even going to describe it because it's just horrific, yes, it brings the reality of what happened, and it's just jarring, which is, I'm sure, what the filmmaker wanted. So it's very disturbing. I think the thing that resonated with me, not only watching this film, but then shortly after, I saw an interview with Anthony Hopkins, who portrayed Hitler in some movie. And he said that the director came to him and said, "You're making him too human. You need to dial up the villain." And Anthony responded with, "He was a human." And I think the takeaway for me in Nuremberg was what Dr. Kelly, I believe his name was, Rami Malek's character, was trying to understand so as to be a cautionary tale for future
Correct.
people is we all have this capability, and so it's within us to make sure that you don't fall prey to whatever it is that tipped these people to make evil decisions. And that starts at the top, but Hitler couldn't have done he did not kill 7 million Jews by his own hand. There were people that did his bidding. And so what caused those people to set aside their own ethics and morals in order to do this? And I think Dr. Kelly was just trying to say, let's understand this so we don't become this. I felt like in a way that's what, and I'm trust me, I hope I don't sound like a Hitler apologist, because I am not at all trying to say that. But as someone who also is interested in psychology, I've also been fascinated by kind of like the minds of serial killers, because it's like, what part of our own either human brain, decision making, psyche gets someone to the place of doing bad things? And they can even be like, you know, like I've lied to people, or I've maybe mistreated people at times. And, you know, how far do you go? Like these psychological questions, and I think these moral questions of what's okay. Like it's okay to tell your best friend she looks great, even if you don't think so, because that just spares her feelings. Like, you know, there's all those kind of things. But then you get into some big, hairy stuff. Like, I'm fascinated by cults because I agree with Mark Vicente. Nobody says, I want to join a cult today. But you get enamored by a human being and you end up following them. And then before you know it, you are in a cult. Like, I accidentally almost was in a cult because I was just trying to better myself and go to workshops and be a better person. So my intentions were pure, but you can accidentally find yourself in a place where you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, I mentioned that I like to say that I was raised cult adjacent. But you can see if a person is in an environment where there is no counterbalance, that they wouldn't know any different. I thought it was good writing. There is a part where Russell Crowe gives an impassioned monologue near the end of the film, but he talks about the only difference between the Germans and the Americans is you won. And at a certain level, that is true. The victors do write the story. They're the heroes and everything. But I think there is also a somewhat slight difference, because as much as you point at, for example, the Japanese internment camps, the U.S. was not blameless in treating people poorly because of their ethnicity. Those internment camps were not the concentration camps. There was a somewhat difference, but also his point is valid.
Even if there weren't losses of life, there were losses of
absolutely
of careers,
it was wrong.
Of property, of stability.
Right. You could argue, well, yeah, we were jerks, but to fewer people. In World War II, we talk about nuclear weapons, and the U.S. dropped 2 nuclear weapons on Japan. You could say in Germany, the bombing of Dresden, there were cases where people said we are going to harm people who are not combatants because the overall ends justify the means, and that is a very sketchy situation to be in. I think this film explores that concept without going too deep into this philosophy, which maybe would have made it less successful as a film if it was really about that. But I think that's an important subject that came up during World War II, but certainly goes forward to today. Rami Malek's character, that doctor, wrote a book after these experiences, and he tried to get people to see the parallels that were going on in the United States at the time with what was happening in the 30s in Germany. And I think the listeners of this podcast today can see parallels even today. I've talked about recently what happens when you have a bunch of economically broke single males. That is who Hitler used as his army, basically the people who are going to beat others up. That's always a demagogue's greatest resource, is these unattached young men who don't have anything else to lose. That's a dangerous cocktail, as it were. And Santayana is credited with those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I think this movie is touching on themes that are still relevant today. Even though we didn't have a big war like that. Now our conflicts are on a smaller scale, but it's a topic that is important. And I was glad to see somebody made a film about it. In some sense, this is a very hot button issue. Oscar-winning films tackle these heavy subjects, so in that sense, it was a leg up. But it is a super volatile, super divisive issue. People have a lot of strong opinions when you start talking about the Nazis. So in that sense, it was maybe a brave film to make, because it's possible they could have come across, someone could have interpreted this film as, oh, you're apologizing for these guys. I don't think that's the case. I think they show them as evil and insane and normal. I mean, the guys who are on trial were a mixed bag.
Well, I think the danger is making someone so evil and to not recognize, and I'm not trying to advocate for compassion on these people, but I think the more we realize that we all have this within us, and it's a choice that we make to be kind and compassionate and moral or not, I think the better, because if you make this person such an other, which Hitler obviously was in this current, he was a father, he was a husband. People loved him. He was kind to them. So to a certain degree, we need to realize that there are more similarities maybe, and even just we're humans. And once again, not to extend compassion, but just to hold ourselves at a higher accountability, because we need to continue to make good choices and be compassionate to people that are othered and not try to kill them, but just kind of instead of viewing the Jews as others, why didn't the Nazis try to understand them? And I know I'm sounding very Pollyanna right now, but I think moving forward, if there's a group that you're nervous about that you don't understand, making them evil or wrong or bad is not going to get you as far as just trying to understand where they're coming from. What are the commonalities? I mean, I'm even guilty of this, because there's political affiliations that are different than my own, and it's easier to just consider them as crazy people, right? But that's not probably the best way. It's probably better to try to come to an understanding of where they're coming from.
This goes back to what that racing instructor said. Everybody just wants big Christmases with lots of grandbabies. Asterisk being Christmas being winter holiday of your choosing. I think in this particular case, you could argue that the Germans at that time felt that they had been excluded after World War I and made the butt of the joke and the ones who were blamed for everything. This is not to justify what the Nazis ended up doing, but it's possible there were people in Germany who felt like what they were doing to the Jews and the Gypsies and everybody else they didn't like was just what had been done to them. Much like people who are raised in an abusive household can become abusers themselves, in that that's just what they know. This is what you do, and when you're big enough, then you're the one who does the hitting instead of getting hit. So that was, I think, another subject that came up in the film, in the dialogue. And as I mentioned before, I thought it was well done and not preachy.
Yeah, I agree. It was, the messages were there, but it wasn't overt. And honestly, it was a sad comment, but the last title card, no spoilers because this could be looked up, but the Dr. Kelly, he was just trying to point out kind of what I'm stumbling to say, is that we all have this within us and we need to look inside and kind of just be aware of it. He was criticized. His book didn't do well. He had trouble getting people to kind of listen to him. And I think it was 5 years after this trial, or it was a very short span of time, he killed himself. Mm-hmm. And so it just is so sad, because now it seems so obvious, especially in hindsight, looking back at history, that of course, and so that his work not only wasn't praised or wasn't at least understood and accepted, but so much so, that he was taken to that point. And I guess as someone who has compassion for people who feel suicidal, that's a very dark, bleak place to be for him to think that that was the only answer.
I don't know that anyone knows to what degree that contributed, but it seems highly likely that his experiences both in the trial and writing the book and then its reception contributed, because you could see a person, if he felt like I spent a lot of time getting to know what happened with Nazis, and now I'm seeing it happen here too. Whether or not that was accurate, that was maybe how he was feeling, and that would be very depressing. I do think if he was around today, he would look at the current political climate and be sad that there are still these parallels, but I think that's what
Like,
you're
why
getting
haven't
at.
we learned?
The message of the film is this is part of humanity, that certain circumstances can lead to that. And one of the things I have mentioned off air to you many times over the years is these trials are where we as a species said you can no longer claim I was just following orders. And that's a very difficult position to be put in as a regular infantry guy. But we as a species said there needs to be some things which are just base level, non-negotiables. This is not how we do things. And I do think that given that perspective, most modern nations would not get 100% score.
Well, but like it makes me so sad for anyone who has served in the military, because generally you're quite young when you join. I mean, I know that you can join later, but oftentimes they're like 18, right?
Yeah, 18, 19, 20, right?
I mean,
in
I'm
there.
sure I haven't looked up the stats. That's the vast majority of people that join. And I've heard from people who have gone through it, that boot camp specifically, but then your early years, you're basically conditioned to not think and to just
Correct.
follow orders.
Yes.
Right? To me, this sets up, as someone who is indoctrinated by a religion as a young person,
Sure.
to not think. You're just
Right.
supposed to
Do
believe.
what you're
supposed
told.
to have
Yeah.
faith.
Yeah.
That you turn off a critical thinking. You're supposed to. That's the ideal. That the military and, in my experience, religion wants you to turn off your critical thinking and just have faith. And I love faith, but I have faith in humanity. Anyway, so then you're conditioning people, and that's what cults do too. You're conditioning people to not use their own brain and just to follow orders. Of course you're going to have these problems because you have been conditioned to act and behave based on the authority of your superior.
Right.
So how do we avoid? And so I guess like the WikiLeaks or
Exactly.
that girl reality show or reality. Oh, I watched a documentary, but these people who end up working for the military, but that go against the military because they see something that has been done wrong and they call it out, and then they get, called that they're unpatriotic and they're going against their own country. And how do you rationalize that? Because if taken to its extreme, we have another Nazi situation where
Right.
people are killing people who don't deserve to be killed. But I'm sure the Nazis were fed a steady diet of these people are evil, these people are bad,
Oh,
these people
sure.
are less than. Because I think in order to kill that many people in such gruesome ways, you have to demonize the Jews in order to get people to do what they did.
Yes, I think there is also, in that particular time, at least in German culture, a much stronger than average following the rules instinct, so that when the bad guys were in charge and got to make the rules, a lot of people just did what they were told. Well, this doesn't seem quite right, but that's the rule, right? The rules. That was a component as well. And that's why I said this is very difficult for your 19-year-old soldier to say, no, we expect you to, in some cases, say no, but in other cases, just do what you're told without thinking.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing.
No wonder a lot of military people come back kind of...
Well, as well as the things that you see, there
Yeah.
are cases where you would say, I brought up obviously Hiroshima, but also Dresden and some of these things where you say, well, yeah, we killed lots and lots of civilians, but it's worth it because we shortened the war. I don't know if that's right or wrong, if that's justifiable or not. That's a difficult situation. And that's what I liked about making a film like this, because it is taking a position, it is saying the Nazis were wrong, but it's also showing that it is a nuanced
How'd they get there?
discussion. Yeah, they're not this caricature. One of the characters, historically accurate, this guy Rudolf Hess, and when that character is brought in, he does the stiff arm salute. That is probably true. There were probably some people in the German war machine that were super duper patriotic and thought this was absolutely right to do. My guess is that there were also people who were very conflicted, who said, gosh, this doesn't seem quite right, but I'm supposed to do this and I'm told to do this. And then you also think about if you said, no, the guy you're pissing off has guns. So the stakes are very high. This is a thing, and that's why I liked the way this film approached it, because it's a very serious subject, but it wasn't a navel-gazing thing. It was humanizing it, making us see there were these two main characters, Rami and Russell, but you saw the people in the film as humans. And I think that was the real lasting message of that doctor, was that this is in all people, that you could change the colors of the uniform and this story could play out in any other country. And I think we often, the reason that I think his book didn't land well is we have this idea that we're the good guys. Everybody thinks that. Everybody thinks they're the hero. But in reality, like I said, the Van Halen video, right now your country is doing things you thought only other countries did. I think that's really accurate, and it's hard for sometimes people to accept, but I think you have to accept that before you can move past to, like you said, how do we stop this from happening again?
So because everybody loves a bookend, I will bring up what you brought up at the beginning, and you called this film Oscar bait.
Yes.
So whenever I have heard that term, I thought it had a connotation of, it's not really that the film is good, it's that they're actively putting into the film things that will bring it Oscar buzz. So is my connotation of Oscar bait, because it's like, it's on its own, it's not a good enough film to be Oscar worthy, but because they have imbued it with Oscar-like Oscar favored themes, vistas, wardrobe,
Right.
you know,
the
like, that makes it Oscar baity. So I'm asking you, is your context of Oscar bait that it's a worthy of an Oscar nom, or that they've set up the conditions so that it is Oscar worthy?
I see what you're saying. Probably, maybe other people use Oscar bait more like that, of saying it's not a good film. I meant it more like bait in the sense of on the end of a hook, because this to me is almost like chum in the water for Oscar contention, because the subject matter and the big names and everything. And I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way, but I feel like when you're in pre-production, you know that. Just like when I'm in pre-production for little film about people standing around and talking, I know 100% that's not going to get any Oscar buzz, right? I just feel like when you see the synopsis of this come across your desk, you're like, that's what this is going to be. This is going to...
It's Oscar worthy then.
Well, it's in that realm. It's in that league, right? You could have taken this film and completely crapped it out and not be Oscar worthy. It's not a guaranteed thing, I guess is what I'm saying. But I think you're right. Maybe many people would say, when they hear me say Oscar bait, that's more of a negative, like they just did it to get an Oscar, not because they cared about what they were doing.
Right.
And that was, I more meant that this would be very attractive, that the Oscar judges would be circling this one, given its subject matter. And like I said, it is a period piece.
Yeah. It's
a drama. It's got big stakes, like good name actors, foreign languages. Like, just to me, it's like, oh yeah,
it does.
This has all of the things that you tend to see in those Best Picture candidates.
Yeah, I would love the audience to weigh in and tell me when,
absolutely,
when the term Oscar bait is used.
Right.
Is it that the filmmakers are actively imbuing in the film things that will check the boxes for, I guess, an Oscar nom?
Yeah. So,
does it just mean it's worthy of?
I was maybe using that in a term that, in a way, others wouldn't. I was seeing it more of, if you put a box of donuts on a table with me around, that's Mike bait. I'm going to come sniffing around.
Right.
Whether or not I eat a donut, I'm going to go see what's there.
And so it's the nefariousness of the person that put out the donuts.
Exactly. Trying to lure me to my death again. So I went into this film thinking it's going to be a drama about, Nazi trials.
I thought it would be horribly depressing. And
so did I.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't. It was a good drama.
It was.
It's a very serious subject. Like I said, I don't think they trivialized the subject at all. I liked how the director focused on one particular aspect of this, one facet, in a way that it was about these people that were involved. So mostly Rami Malek's character, but also somewhat Michael Shannon's character. And then the people who played Goering's family, which again, I don't know what really happened to them, so I can't comment on the historical accuracy. I did like that the actors approached this just as an acting role, not attempting to, there's no affectation, I guess I should say. Even though Russell Crowe did speak German, it landed well. It felt like they set out to make a movie, not to make a point, which is, well, that's a good log line maybe. They can use that for free. The soundtrack is also, the music was great. I listened to the album this morning during writing pages time, but it was really well done by a fellow by the name, I think Mark Butler is, I think his name, if I remember correctly. The cinematography, I thought was very well done. Obviously, production design, they got to go crazy with.
Where was it filmed? Helsinki?
I thought it was Czechoslovakia somewhere, perhaps.
Okay.
I thought it was maybe Central Europe. Of course, costuming and all of that. I have to say, I do feel like women's fashions in the 40s were outstanding. The few gals that were in this film looked great on screen, but like all war films, right, of the time, it was mostly a bunch of guys standing around in olive drab wool. But they did well. So real well done. I didn't look up the budget, but it looks like there's a lot of budget on the screen. It looks like everybody, they really brought the best people. One thing that I found was interesting, I don't know if this is accurate or a filmmaking choice, the walkway they built from the prison to the courthouse, which I do know they did in fact build one to protect them on their walk over. It was, the planks were not flush with each other, so you could see through the gap, and I think even maybe some substances could come through the gap at the poor prisoners. I don't know if that's true or not. Was lumber so hard to come by that they just used scraps? It seems like if you told a carpenter to build a covered walkway, their gaps would be a lot smaller, but it made for point in the film. There's also some fisticuffs of a sort with Colin Hanks, who is not normally known for his wrestling, but there was some stunt work there, stage combat as well.
Great acting in this movie, and great cast and great acting, I thought. I mean, I love, John Slattery and Michael Shannon and Colin Hanks. I mean, just the heavy, and then Rami and Russell, they brought it. I mean,
so I guess maybe part of why I talk about Oscars, because I too thought it was going to be a depressing film. Nothing against Schindler's List, but very dark film.
Right.
This was maybe a little closer to A Few Good Men.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I think for that worked well. Worked well for them.
And it's interesting you say that, because there was a moment because just even in stature right now, Russell and Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men are very comparable, let's say.
Right, yes.
And there was a moment where I felt like we were building to a "you need me on that wall" kind of a speech from Russell. And so it was just like, are they going to do that? Like, I guess we've been conditioned. And I think, that's not the only, I think in To Kill a Mockingbird, there's a moment when Gregory Peck is making a big impassioned speech.
Any courtroom film.
Right. Any courtroom, you're building to a big dramatic moment whether it be portrayed by the witness or by the prosecutor, where there's the big reveal. Like, it's where Mike Brady throws the briefcase on the floor, right?
Nice callback.
You're building, for us older folks, you're building. And so I guess that, that's a trope, you could call it maybe, but there was a tension definitely building that I was like, are we going to have a big outburst? So, but I really, like you said, I felt like this was, sometimes I approach movies as, I don't really want to watch this movie, but I feel like I should for historical context, for,
Right.
just to be a well-rounded human. I felt like this was in that category, but when I left, I was so glad that I had seen this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I was so appreciative and admired the filmmakers, and I'm a little bummed that there was not a DGA podcast episode, because as the listeners know, that's one of my favorite podcasts, and I love it for film context. And so I actually came home and looked up on YouTube the filmmaker interviews, because I like to hear from the filmmakers and what was their intention, what was the road that led them, did
Sure.
somebody bring this project to them, or was this something that they've been noodling on since their grandfather told them about it, or those kind of
Right.
stories. I love the behind the scenes stories.
I will say, no DGA podcast yet. Perhaps as I'm sure
keep
they're
looking.
listeners of our podcast, they'll hear that desire and want to solve that problem. I, would categorize this in a film. Going into it, I felt like it was something that was important to see, and that the subject matter was important, but it was different than I had expected in a very good kind of way. I would recommend
it.
Yeah, going to see this film, both from the standpoint of seeing a good courtroom drama, but also I think it talks about
Historical
some things
context.
that are important, as well as to see Colin Hanks wrestling with somebody. I mean, that's got to be worth something.
I mean, the acting alone is worth this movie.
Yeah.
So just right there.
Well done. Big fan. Anything else you
I
any
can't
further
think of anything
thoughts?
other than 2 thumbs up.
All right, yeah, way to go. And remember, Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.